Tonight, we descend into the oldest written shadows of the human imagination. You are not beginning with a legend whispered beside a fire, though perhaps it once was. You are beginning with clay, baked by accident, buried by time, and lifted again from the dust of southern Mesopotamia. In the late 19th century, archaeologists working among the ruins of ancient cities found thousands of cuneiform tablets, many now preserved in institutions such as the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania Museum. Some were lists, some were contracts, some were prayers, and some were doors. They did not open with golden light. They opened downward into a place the Sumerians imagined beneath the living world, where the dead continued in silence, clothed in dust, drinking darkness, and remembering the warmth of daylight like a fading dream. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as the night settles around you, right where you are watching from, and the local time outside your window, it is strange, is it not, to think that while you rest beneath electric light, someone 4,000 years ago may have feared the same darkness, listened to the same silence, and wondered where the soul goes when breath leaves the body. The Sumerians did not leave us a comforting paradise. They did not imagine death as a bright reunion among fields of peace, at least not in the oldest surviving records. What waits beyond death in their world is more severe, more mysterious, and perhaps more human. It is not a place of punishment for the wicked alone. It is not a reward reserved for the righteous. It is simply where everyone goes. Kings descend there. Servants descend there. Priests, mothers, warriors, singers, children, and nameless laborers all pass into the same dim country. That is the unsettling beauty of it. You are standing now in the heat of ancient Sumer, where the rivers Tigris and Euphrates spread their brown fingers through marshland, reed beds, and fields of barley. The air is thick with river damp and sun-baked clay. Mud brick walls rise in the distance, pale under a hard sky. Somewhere nearby, a temple platform catches the last orange light, and the scent of bitumen, grain, wool, and smoke drifts through the streets. Sandals scrape against packed earth. A donkey brays in the dusk. A scribe bends over wet clay with a reed stylus in his hand, pressing wedge-shaped signs into the surface. He is not trying to entertain you. He is keeping order. Grain must be counted. Workers must be assigned. Offerings must be recorded. Names must not be lost. And yet, in the same world of accounts and measures, there are tablets that speak of ghosts, gods, laments, and a realm called the Land of No Return. Modern scholars at Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have long studied these texts as some of humanity's earliest preserved reflections on death. Their research confirms something simple but profound. The Sumerians were not merely building cities. They were building a written memory of fear. You feel it in the phrase itself. The land of no return. There is no need to shout it. The words are heavy enough. In later stories from Mesopotamia, the dead dwell in a house of dust, a place with gates, guards, decrees, and customs older than any living witness. The Sumerian imagination gives death a structure. It is not chaos. It is administration. Of course it is. This is Mesopotamia. Even the underworld seems to have paperwork. There is a gentle, uncomfortable humor in that. The first cities may have invented taxes, bureaucracy, written law, and, apparently, a very serious border policy for ghosts. But the humor fades quickly, because the rule is clear. Souls may go down, but they do not come back as they were. This is the central mystery that waits beneath the clay. Why did the Sumerians imagine death as a one-way passage? Why could even divine beings struggle to return from below? Why did the dead, once separated from food, breath, family, and name, become something thinner than life, but not entirely gone? Perhaps this belief grew from the landscape itself. Southern Mesopotamia is a place where water gives life, but mud swallows everything. A body returns to earth quickly in such heat. A city can vanish into its own bricks. A name can disappear unless someone writes it down, speaks it aloud, or pours water for the dead. That last act matters. In Sumerian and later Mesopotamian ritual, the dead depended on the living in ways that feel intimate and troubling. A family might bring offerings, pour libations, and remember names. The dead were not absent in the modern sense. They were below, diminished and unreachable, yet still connected by duty. Forgetting them was not only sad, it was dangerous. Here begins the strange tenderness of the Sumerian afterlife. It is bleak, yes, but it is not empty. The dead still matter. Their condition can be worsened by neglect. Their memory can be softened by care. Their hunger can echo upward into the dreams of the living. Some texts even suggest that improperly buried spirits might wander, troubling houses, appearing in omens, or clinging to the edges of sleep. A quirky old belief, found in later Mesopotamian magical traditions, held that ghosts could be managed with rituals, offerings, and spoken formulas, rather like difficult relatives who had moved underground and refused to stop complaining. It sounds almost funny. Almost, because beneath the oddness is grief. The kind of grief that asks practical questions because the heart cannot bear vague answers. Is he cold? Is she thirsty? Does the child know we remember? Can the dead hear us? Can they come home? The Sumerian answer is quiet and firm. Not truly. A soul may trouble the living. A ghost may appear. A god may cross boundaries under extraordinary conditions. But the ordinary dead do not return to ordinary life. Death changes the shape of existence. The door closes. The breath is gone. The person becomes shadow, memory, name, and need. There is an open scholarly debate about how literally ancient Sumerians understood these descriptions. Some researchers view the underworld texts as mythic poetry rather than fixed doctrine. Others argue that ritual tablets and burial customs reveal deeply held assumptions about what the dead required. The truth may rest somewhere between temple, household, and imagination, where belief is not a system in a book, but a habit lived daily. You can almost see that habit now. A woman kneels near a grave with a small vessel of water. Her fingers are dusty. The evening insects begin their thin music in the reeds. She speaks a name that would otherwise vanish. She does not expect the dead to rise. She does not demand an answer. She offers what she can, across a distance no hand can cross. That is where this story truly begins, not with monsters, not with thunder, but with a person kneeling in the dust, trying to keep someone from being entirely lost. The Sumerian records do not promise that love conquers death. They suggest something older and sadder. Love may not open the gate. Love may not bring the soul back. But love might still reach downward, like water poured into dry earth, disappearing from sight, yet not entirely wasted. And so you remain there for a moment, under the darkening sky of ancient Mesopotamia, while the city quiets and the temple lamps begin to glow. Beneath your feet, in the imagined deep, the dead wait in their sealed country. Above them, the living count grain, raise children, argue over debts, bake bread, and whisper names into the night. The clay remembers some of those whispers. Most are gone. Perhaps that is why the tablets feel so powerful. They are not only records of what the Sumerians believed, they are small survivals against the very silence they feared. Each wedge pressed into clay is a mark against forgetting. Each myth is a lantern held near the mouth of a tunnel, and somewhere beyond that tunnel waits the question that has never stopped breathing in the human mind. What remains when we cannot return? Your mind drifts into the city where death is not hidden away from life. It stands close to the river, low and wide beneath a pale sky, made from the same mud that stains the workers' feet. Walls rise in baked layers of brown and gold. Roofs are flat, doorways are narrow. Courtyards smell of smoke, onions, wool, and damp earth. In the morning, light creeps over reed mats, clay jars, and sleeping dogs. This is a world where everything returns to dust, yet nothing is treated as meaningless. The city breathes through its temples. People move through streets that twist between houses like dry channels. Potters turn clay. Brewers stir jars of beer. Children chase one another past tethered goats. Scribes sit with tablets balanced in their palms, pressing signs into wet clay before the sun hardens the day. The living are busy. The dead are nearby. In ancient southern Mesopotamia, burial was often part of domestic space. Archaeological work at cities such as Ur and Nippur has shown that some of the dead were placed beneath house floors, courtyards, or areas closely tied to family life. Research connected with major university collections in Philadelphia, Chicago, and London has helped reveal this intimate pattern. Death didn't always move far away into some distant field. It could settle beneath the room where bread was eaten. That fact changes the silence. You may imagine a family waking above an ancestor. A mother grinds grain while a grandfather lies below packed clay. A child learns to walk near the place where a name has been buried. The boundary between household and tomb is thin, not because people are careless, but because memory has an address. A strange comfort lives there, a strange pressure, too. The Sumerian city is not merely a cluster of homes and markets, it is a sacred machine, turning under divine ownership. Each city has its patron god, its temple estate, its workers, its festivals, its scribes, and its offerings. The temple rises higher than ordinary roofs, not because it is only beautiful, but because it joins heaven, earth, and the deep below. To live in such a place is to feel watched from every direction. Above, the gods receive smoke and praise. Below, the dead wait in darkness. Between them, humans carry baskets. That little sentence might be the most honest summary of early civilization ever made. People build canals, raise walls, haul bricks, harvest barley, and serve powers greater than themselves. In one direction are the shining gods. In another direction are the dust-covered dead. Human life passes between them like a boat on a brown river, carrying grain, worry, and brief laughter. The city teaches this lesson through sound. You hear the scrape of reeds against clay. You hear cattle lowing near the gate. You hear a priest's voice rise over an offering table. Somewhere, a mourner chants in a courtyard, not loudly, but with the exhausted rhythm of someone who has already wept enough. The lament does not stop the city from working. It becomes part of the work. That is unsettling and very human. The Sumerians lived in a landscape that demanded organization. Rivers flooded, fields needed canals, and grain required storage. Records confirm that by the late 4th and 3rd millennia, BC urban centers in Mesopotamia were using writing for administration, trade, labor, and temple management. The same technology that counted sheep also preserved prayers. The same clay that recorded rations also held myths of descent. It is hard not to smile at that. The human mind invents accounting, then immediately uses it to worry about ghosts. There is a quirky tidbit buried in the everyday world of these cities. Some Mesopotamian texts and rituals suggest that the dead could become troublesome if improperly cared for. A ghost might be treated almost like a legal problem, a household disturbance, or an unwanted visitor with very old complaints. A ritual specialist might be called, not with a flashlight and dramatic music, thankfully, but with formulas, offerings, and inherited seriousness. The dead had etiquette. Naturally, in such a world, the city itself becomes a map of seen and unseen obligations. A doorway is not just wood and hinge. A threshold is a place where danger may cross. A grave is not just a pit, it is a bond. A meal is not just food. It may become part of a relationship with those who no longer chew, speak, or sit at the table. You feel that as you enter an ordinary house. The walls are thick and cool inside. A clay lamp flickers on a low shelf. Dried herbs hang from a peg. A storage jar leans in the corner like a patient animal. The floor is hard beneath your feet, rubbed smooth by years of movement. Below it, perhaps, is someone whose name still rises during offerings. No marble angels guard them. No carved paradise waits nearby. Only the house, the family, the dust, and the obligation to remember. Scholars still debate how consistent Sumerian beliefs about death were across cities and centuries. Some suggest that ordinary families may have held practical household traditions that differed from temple literature. Others note that myths, laments, and ritual texts share enough patterns to reveal a broad underworld imagination. The debate remains open because clay preserves many voices, but never every voice. That is the difficulty with ancient silence. It gives fragments, then asks for humility. You walk farther through the city as evening gathers. The day's heat loosens slowly from the walls. A baker pulls flat loaves from an oven, their surfaces blistered and fragrant. Men return from fields along the canal, their calves streaked with mud. A woman shakes dust from a woven mat. A dog lifts its head, then decides the mystery of existence can wait. Across the rooftops, temple bells or clappers mark a ritual hour. The exact sound is lost, but the intention remains imaginable. People look toward the sacred precinct, where food, drink, incense, and words move toward the gods. Rituals keep order. Order keeps disaster at a distance. Disaster, in Mesopotamia, is never theoretical. Flood, drought, illness, invasion, and failed harvest always wait near the edge of the map. Death belongs to that same family of threats. Yet it is also ordinary. That is what makes the Sumerian view so heavy. Death is not an interruption of reality. It is part of reality's structure. The city acknowledges this by placing the dead close, feeding them through memory, naming them through ritual, and fearing what happens when care fails. Nothing feels completely separate. The river feeds the field feeds the household feeds the temple feeds the gods with offerings, the living feed the dead with remembrance. The dead, if ignored, may trouble the living. Around and around it turns, a quiet system of dependence. You can feel the system in the clay itself. Clay builds the walls, clay holds the writing, clay seals jars, clay receives bodies, clay dries under the sun and cracks when abandoned. The city is made of the same substance as its records and its ruins. It is temporary, but stubborn. It is fragile, but persistent. It falls apart, then survives as broken fragments. A city like this does not need to imagine death as far away. It knows death is underfoot. By night, the streets narrow into darkness. Lamps glow behind doorways. The reeds along the canal whisper in the cooling air. Above, the stars sharpen one by one, bright over a flat land, with no mountains to soften the horizon. Somewhere, a scribe sets aside a tablet. Somewhere, a family pours water for a name. No answer rises from below. Still, the act continues. This is the city where death was written, not as a final explanation, but as a daily arrangement. The Sumerians shaped the unseen with the same hands that shaped bricks. They gave the underworld gates, rules, officers, hunger, thirst, and memory. They made it less vague, though not less frightening. And as you stand in that ancient street, you understand why. A world that can be counted feels safer than a world that cannot. A boundary with guards feels less terrifying than endless emptiness. A land of dust, however bleak, can be named. And what can be named can be approached, mourned, feared, and folded into the rhythm of life. The city sleeps above its dead. The dead remain below the city. Between them, in the cooling darkness, the tablets wait to be read. For a moment, it feels as though the clay itself begins to breathe, not loudly, not like a living chest, but with the faint pressure of memory rising from a sealed room. You are standing among broken tablets, each one small enough to hold in the hand, yet old enough to make the present feel strangely thin. Their surfaces are cracked, burned, chipped, and rubbed by centuries of burial. Some are whole, many are fragments. That is how the underworld reaches you, not as one clean book, not as a finished doctrine. It arrives as pieces oppressed in wedge-shaped signs, carrying the voices of scribes who copied older songs, older fears, and older ritual patterns. The dead do not speak directly from the clay. They are described, framed, remembered, and feared through the words of the living. That distance matters. It gives the Sumerian afterlife its haunted quality. You never receive everything. You receive enough. The tablets describe a realm often imagined as a great house below the earth, a place of dust, darkness, silence, and enclosure. In later Akkadian versions, related images become even more vivid, with the dead eating clay and living in gloom. Yet the roots of the image reach into earlier Sumerian compositions, where the netherworld is not a bright moral courtroom, but a reduced state of existence. It is life made thinner. It is being without sunlight. Research associated with the University of Pennsylvania, the Oriental Institute at Chicago, and other major centers of Mesopotamian study has helped scholars reconstruct these texts from scattered tablets. The work is slow and very unromantic in the best possible way. A scholar may spend years comparing damaged signs, variant copies, and broken lines, only to recover a few uncertain phrases about darkness and dust. History is patient like that. It does not perform on command. The Sumerian word usually translated as the underworld carries meanings connected with the great below, the lower land, or the realm beneath ordinary human movement. It is not simply a grave. It is not only a pit. It is an ordered region of existence, reached by descent, ruled by divine powers, and separated from the upper world by gates and decrees. You can imagine a tablet resting on a wooden table in lamplight. The scribe's hand pauses. The reed stylus hovers. Outside, a goat coughs in the courtyard, because even in ancient cosmic literature, goats remain committed to ruining the atmosphere. The scribe continues anyway, pressing the signs carefully, turning terror into record. That little act is astonishing. The invisible becomes administrative, a place no living person can visit and return from, at least not in the ordinary way, is given features a city dweller can understand. There are gates, there is a palace, there are rulers, there are attendants, there is protocol. The afterlife is mysterious, yes, but it is not shapeless. It resembles an earthly kingdom stripped of warmth. This is one of the hidden truths in the tablets. The Sumerians did not imagine death as pure nothingness. They imagined a continuation that might be worse than an ending, because identity persists without vitality. The person becomes a shadow of social existence, dependent on remembrance, offerings, and proper burial. You are not fully gone, but you are no longer fully yourself. That is a colder idea than simple oblivion. It keeps grief awake. Ancient records suggest that conditions below could vary. A person with many descendants and proper rights might fare better than one forgotten or abandoned. A warrior, a parent, a childless man, a drowned body, or an unburied corpse might each have different fates in later Mesopotamian descriptions. The details shift across texts, but the pattern remains unsettling. Social bonds continue to matter when the body is still. The grave is not the end of obligation. It is another address. There is a mainstream historical fact here, quiet but important. Excavations in Mesopotamian cities have shown that burial customs, grave goods, and household rituals were closely tied to family identity and social status. Scholars from institutions such as Yale and Chicago have emphasized that death in ancient Mesopotamia cannot be separated from community life. What happened to the dead depended partly on what the living continued to do. That makes the tablets feel less abstract. They are not merely stories about gods. They are shadows cast by households. When a text describes the underworld as a house of dust, you begin to hear the domestic echo. A house is where one belongs. A house holds family, food, sleeping mats, jars, and names. But this house is inverted. Its food is dust. Its drink is absence. Its walls do not protect comfort. They contain the irreversible. A doorway usually invites passage. This doorway refuses return. The image becomes even stronger when you think of Mesopotamian houses made from mud brick. A living house slowly decays unless repaired. Rain melts it, heat cracks it, neglect returns it to earth. The underworld, too, seems like a vast house of decay, where all human brightness settles into the same dim material. The clay of the wall, the clay of the tablet, the clay of the grave, and the clay beneath the riverbank become part of one long meditation. Everything shaped becomes unshaped. Everything named needs renaming. Some tablets preserve laments for cities destroyed by gods, invaders, or catastrophe. In these compositions, abandoned streets and silent temples sometimes feel almost like the underworld itself. A city without offerings becomes ghostly. A temple without songs becomes hollow. A home without descendants becomes a room where memory has stopped burning. The line between dead person and dead city can blur. That is not accidental. Sumerian thought often connects order with ritual attention. When offerings cease, when names vanish, when proper actions fail, the world frays, the dead become hungry, gods become distant, cities become vulnerable. A society built on irrigation knows what happens when maintenance stops. The canal silts up, the field dries, the household suffers. Even the dead require maintenance. A quirky or fringe idea sometimes raised in popular discussions claims that Sumerian underworld texts preserve memories of ancient tunnels, forgotten subterranean chambers, or literal priestly journeys beneath temple complexes. Scholars are careful with such claims, and rightly so. Still, the idea has a strange charm. One can understand why people imagine hidden passages below ziggurats, because the texts themselves make descent feel architectural. But poetry is not a floor plan. The underworld's gates are more likely symbolic and mythic, even when inspired by real doorways, tombs, and city structures. That does not weaken them. Symbols can endure longer than stone. A gate in myth may hold more power than a gate in brick, because everyone who hears the story must pass through it eventually. You feel the weight of that as the tablet turns in your imagined hand. A broken edge interrupts a line. A missing corner swallows a name. A damaged sign leaves scholars uncertain whether the text speaks of dust, darkness, or some official of the lower realm. The gap becomes part of the experience. It is almost too fitting. The afterlife itself comes to you through absences. Even knowledge cannot return whole. There is an open scholarly debate about how much of the Sumerian underworld was shaped by temple theology, and how much came from older household traditions. Some researchers see elite scribal schools preserving refined mythological systems. Others suspect that these compositions drew deeply from popular mourning practices, burial customs, and family rituals. The evidence does not allow an easy answer. Perhaps that uncertainty suits the subject. Death rarely gives easy answers. Your ears fill with a soft, imagined sound, the tiny scrape of reed on damp clay. A student scribe copies a line about the place below. He may be bored. He may be nervous. He may simply wish the lesson would end so he can eat. Yet his hand preserves a world in which every living person is already walking above a hidden country. That is the quiet revelation. The Sumerian underworld is not far away in the stars. It is not beyond a shining horizon. It is underneath. It is beneath the floor, beneath the city, beneath the river plain, beneath the work of the living. The dead are not lifted away from earth. They are taken deeper into it. This makes the world feel layered. At the top, birds cross the open sky. In the middle, people grind grain, seal jars, marry, argue, sing, and bargain. Below, the dead sit in their dim house, unreachable yet not erased. The tablets from this house of dust do not offer comfort in any modern sense. They offer shape. They give grief a geography, fear a doorway, and memory a duty. They show a people trying to understand why the beloved body becomes still, why dreams may still carry voices, and why no plea brings the dead back into morning light. The answer is not spoken as philosophy. It is pressed into clay. The dead are below. The gate is closed. The living must remember. In your ears, the echo changes into footsteps at a gate. They are not hurried footsteps. They are slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if each step has already been written somewhere in the deep. The road descends through a landscape that feels less like distance and more like surrender. Dust clings to the ankles. The air cools. The light thins until it becomes a memory rather than a presence. At the center of this descent stands Inanna, Queen of Heaven, Goddess of love, war, desire, power, and dangerous confidence. She is magnificent, of course. She would probably remind you herself, if given the opportunity. Yet in the old Sumerian poem, her magnificence is not enough to protect her. That is the strange force of the story. A goddess goes down. The tale known as the Descent of Inanna is among the most powerful surviving works of Sumerian literature. Scholars working with ancient tablets from major collections have reconstructed the poem from copies preserved in scribal tradition. It tells of Inanna leaving the upper world and entering the domain of her sister, Ereshkigal, Queen of the Dead. The journey is not a tourist visit. It is a crossing into forbidden authority. You feel the danger immediately. Before Inanna descends, she prepares herself with care. She dresses not like a mourner, but like a ruler arriving in full display. She takes the emblems of her status, the bright ornaments and sacred powers that mark who she is. Each item matters: a crown, a necklace, a breast ornament, a measuring rod, a garment, symbols of rule, beauty, command, and identity gather on her body. She's not merely clothed, she is defined. Then she gives instructions to her attendant, a figure of loyalty and intelligence. If she does not return, help must be sought. The detail matters because even a goddess does not descend without fear. She knows the lower realm has laws of its own. She knows authority above does not simply transfer below. Even divine status may be checked at the border. That border appears as 7 gates. 7 is not casual here. Across ancient Mesopotamian thought, numbers could carry structure and sacred pattern. The 7 gates create rhythm, suspense, and order. They make the descent feel official. This is not a fall through emptiness. This is admission through a system, one threshold at a time. At the first gate, a demand is made. Something must be removed. Inanna questions the gatekeeper, and the answer comes with cold simplicity. Such are the rules of the underworld. There is no negotiation. No royal exception is offered. No cheerful upgrade is available for frequent divine travelers. At each gate, another piece of her power is taken away. The descent becomes an undoing. The crown leaves her, then another ornament, then another sign of authority. With every gate, she becomes less protected by the identity she carried from above. The poem moves almost like a ritual stripping. Each removal is calm, relentless, and strangely intimate. You do not merely watch someone travel downward. You watch a self being dismantled. This is why the story lingers. It understands death, not death as a sudden event only, but death as the removal of everything by which the world recognizes you. Rank falls away. Beauty falls away. Clothing falls away. Tools fall away, titles fall away. At the end, what remains is exposed before powers that do not flatter and do not forget. Inanna reaches the throne room below. There, Ereshkigal waits. She is not a villain in any simple sense. She is queen of a realm that has its own sorrow, its own law, and its own terrible dignity. In some tellings, she is associated with the pains of birth and death, with cries that rise from the hidden places of existence. She rules where no sunlight enters, yet rule she does. The underworld is not leaderless. It has a sovereign. The meeting of the sisters is one of ancient literature's most unsettling confrontations. Inanna arrives stripped of her powers. Ereshkigal and the judges of the underworld see her, judge her, and the goddess who crossed the gates becomes a corpse. In the poem, her body is hung up, inert and powerless. A goddess becomes still. That line is heavy. The mainstream historical fact is that this poem was copied in scribal schools, where students learned language, tradition, and theology through literary compositions. Researchers at institutions such as Oxford, Chicago, and Pennsylvania have studied how such texts formed part of elite education in ancient Mesopotamia. The descent was not just entertainment. It was part of a learned world that preserved ideas about divine order, death, and ritual speech. Yet the story feels older than school. It feels like a nightmare made formal. You can imagine a student copying the lines while trying not to think too hard about them. 7 gates, 7 removals, a goddess judged, a body hanging in darkness. The reed stylus presses into clay, and suddenly homework becomes a little too existential. Ancient education, apparently, could still ruin your afternoon. The tale does not end with Inanna remaining below, but her return is not simple. Help must be sent. The gods above hesitate, negotiate, and respond in different ways. Eventually, beings are created or dispatched to enter the underworld, not with force, but with sympathy toward Ereshkigal's suffering. They do not conquer the lower realm. They follow its emotional and ritual logic. That detail is remarkable. The underworld is not defeated by shouting. It is approached by understanding. Inanna is revived, yet the rules remain. No one leaves the underworld without replacement. This is the heart of the story's chill. Return is possible only under exceptional divine conditions, and even then, the balance must be paid. The lower realm releases nothing freely. Life above demands a substitute from below. The gate can open, but it remembers the debt. This is not resurrection as comfort. It is exchange. The poem then turns toward Dumuzi, Inanna's consort, whose fate becomes bound to her return. In some traditions, his sister shares his burden for part of the year, creating a pattern of absence and return connected with seasonal rhythms. The myth has been discussed by scholars as a possible reflection of fertility cycles, royal ideology, mourning rituals, or divine drama. No single explanation captures all its layers. There is an open scholarly debate about whether the descent primarily represents a vegetation myth, a ritual drama, a theological exploration of divine power, or a meditation on death itself. Different researchers emphasize different strands, and the poem allows them all to breathe uneasily together. It is too rich to behave politely as only one thing. That is why it survives in the mind. A quirky fringe tidbit sometimes appears in modern interpretations, claiming the 7 gates describe hidden initiation chambers, astronomical levels, or secret teachings about the soul's passage after death. These readings often move beyond what the tablets can prove, but they reveal how magnetic the story remains. People still want the gates to mean more. Perhaps they do, but perhaps their power is simpler. Each gate says that death removes what life has added. Every ornament taken from Inanna becomes an answer to human pride. You may wear titles, wealth, beauty, cleverness, and memory like bright jewelry. Yet the road downward asks for all of it back, not angrily, not cruelly, simply because the lower world does not admit illusions from above. You stand now at the last gate in imagination. The air is cold on your skin. The darkness feels close, not empty, but occupied. Somewhere beyond the threshold waits a queen who has heard every lament. Somewhere behind you, the upper world continues with its sunlight, bread ovens, gossip, and goats making unnecessary noises at sacred moments. The contrast is almost unbearable. Life is so ordinary. Death is so formal. Inanna's descent reveals why the Sumerian records feel so severe. They do not let even a goddess cross below unchanged. They do not pretend power can pass through death untouched. They do not imagine return as a simple reversal. To descend is to be altered. To rise again requires intervention, payment, and a disturbance in the order of worlds. So you listen to the gates closing one by one, not with a crash, with procedure. That may be the most unsettling sound of all. The underworld does not need rage to hold its dead. It has rules, it has thresholds, it has officers, it has a queen whose authority begins where sunlight ends. And in that dim kingdom, even Inanna must learn what every mortal already knows. The way down is open, the way back is guarded. Your thoughts settle beside a door that opens only inward. It is not a grand door. It is not carved with mercy, victory, or reunion. It feels older than decoration, older than comfort, older than the careful stories people tell themselves when the night grows long. It is a boundary made of rule and silence. On one side, the living breathe. On the other, the dead continue without breath. The Sumerians imagined this boundary with unusual seriousness. Death was not just an event. It was a transfer of jurisdiction. A person did not merely stop moving. They entered a different order, where the customs of the living world no longer applied. The family might weep, wash the body, prepare offerings, and speak the proper words. But none of these acts gave the dead person permission to rise again into ordinary daylight. That is the hard center of the belief. The dead belong below. You can feel how practical this idea is, almost painfully so. A society surrounded by fragile fields, dangerous floods, illness, heat, and sudden loss needed a way to understand separation. The dead could be loved, fed through ritual, remembered by name, and feared as restless presences. Yet they could not simply return to resume their place at the hearth. Imagine what would happen if they could. A father comes back demanding his house. A king returns to claim his throne. A buried debtor asks why the account remains unpaid. A dead wife walks through the doorway while her husband has remarried. A child, lost to fever, stands again at the sleeping mat. Tender. Yes, also chaos. The ancient world feared disorder deeply, so death required law. In Sumerian thought, the underworld is not only dark because it is sad, it is dark because it is separate. It is governed by divine authority, and that authority keeps the boundary firm. Once the dead cross into that lower domain, They become part of a population that must remain contained. The living world cannot endure if every grave becomes a doorway, swinging both ways. This is not cruelty alone. It is cosmic maintenance. The same culture that cut canals through unruly rivers imagined existence as something that must be regulated. Water must be channeled. Grain must be counted. Labor must be assigned. Offerings must be performed. Boundaries must be honored. If limits fail, the world floods, starves, sickens, or collapses. The underworld gate belongs to that logic. It keeps the dead from pouring upward. Records from Mesopotamian ritual life confirm that the dead were treated as continuing presences, yet not as full members of ordinary society. Burials, offerings, and household rites preserved connection, but also established distance. The family cared for the dead precisely because the dead had changed status. They were near in memory, but far in condition. The difference is everything. A living person eats bread. A dead person receives offerings. A living person drinks from a cup. A dead person receives water poured into earth. A living person speaks face to face. A dead person may appear in dream, omen, or disturbance. The relationship survives, but the form is altered. It is like hearing someone through a thick wall. You know they matter. You may even sense need or anger, but the wall remains. You cannot bring them fully into the room, and perhaps you are not supposed to try. Here, the Sumerian imagination becomes quietly unsettling. The soul, or what remains of the person, is not free in the modern romantic sense. It does not soar wherever it wishes. It does not choose a new life at will. It is drawn into a lower structure, subject to powers older and greater than family longing. This is why return is so difficult. The dead are not merely lost. They are claimed. That word feels cold. Claimed? The lower realm has ownership, or at least custody. Its queen, its judges, its gatekeepers, and its decrees hold the dead in place. To remove someone from that realm would be to disrupt divine order. Even stories of extraordinary return show this clearly. When a being leaves below, a substitute may be required. Balance matters more than desire. The ancient imagination does not say, because you love them, they may return. It says, because order exists, the gate remains closed. There is a mainstream historical fact beneath this mythic pattern. Mesopotamian legal, administrative, and religious texts reveal a culture intensely concerned with status, obligation, boundary, and proper procedure. Scholars at universities such as Yale, Oxford, and Chicago have often noted how social order and divine order reflect one another in cuneiform literature. The world of gods, kings, households, and the dead is full of ranked relationships. Even the afterlife has protocol. Of course it does. If a scribe could make a list, someone in Mesopotamia was probably willing to make 3 copies, file one in a temple archive, and quietly judge your handwriting. That gentle absurdity is part of the world's charm. Yet beneath it lies a serious truth. Order protected existence from collapse, and death was too powerful to be left unordered. Still, some spirits did seem to slip. This is where the rules become more interesting. Later Mesopotamian traditions speak of ghosts troubling the living when burial is improper, when offerings fail, or when violent death leaves a spirit unsettled. These ghosts are not fully returned people. They are exceptions, disturbances, signs that something has gone wrong. Their presence proves the boundary by violating it. A locked door matters most when something knocks. You can imagine such a night. The house is quiet. A lamp gutters beside a wall. The smell of warm oil and old reed mats hangs in the room. Someone wakes from a dream with a name on their lips. Outside, a dog whines at nothing visible. The family wonders whether an offering has been neglected, whether a burial was incomplete, whether the dead are thirsty. No one assumes reunion. They suspect disorder. This is an important difference. A ghost is not a comforting visitor from a brighter world. It is often a problem needing ritual repair. The goal is not to invite the dead home permanently. The goal is to restore the boundary, settle the spirit, and return each being to its proper place. Ancient exorcistic and ritual traditions treated wandering dead as symptoms of imbalance. The dead must be cared for. They must not be unleashed. A quirky fringe idea sometimes claims that the Sumerians knew secret methods for crossing between life and death, hidden in temple rituals and coded myths. Such claims are attractive because gates, judges, and underworld messengers sound like parts of a lost technology. The evidence, though, points more toward ritual imagination than mechanical escape. The tablets preserve sacred stories, not instruction manuals for ghost tourism. Still, the fascination is understandable. Who has not wanted a door to hear one voice again, a door to ask whether pain ended, a door to say the sentence left unsaid? The Sumerians understood that longing, but their records rarely soften it. They place guards at the passage. They give the lower realm its own rights. They make return costly, partial, or impossible. There is an open scholarly debate about whether Mesopotamian ideas of no return reflect theological conviction, social control, funerary practice, or the emotional reality of grief shaped into myth. Some researchers emphasize ritual duty toward ancestors. Others focus on literary images of descent and divine law. The question remains open because ancient belief lived in homes, temples, stories, and gestures, not in one tidy statement. Perhaps the real answer is layered. People knew the body did not rise. They dreamed the dead still needed them. They feared a ghost might cross the threshold. They hoped ritual could keep love from dissolving completely. From these truths came a one-way road, terrible and necessary. The dead could not return because death changed them. They could not return because the underworld claimed them. They could not return because the living world needed its boundaries. They could not return because grief, however deep, cannot remake the laws of breath. You stand now beside that inward opening door. The wood feels cold beneath your hand. Dust gathers at its base. No golden light leaks through the cracks. No familiar voice calls clearly from the other side. Yet the silence is not empty. It is full of names, full of offerings, full of all the small attempts the living make to reach what cannot come back. The Sumerian records do not deny love. They deny reversal. That is why the old belief feels so haunting. It does not say the dead are nothing. It says they are elsewhere, altered, contained, and dependent on fragile acts of remembrance. They cannot return to the table, but the living may still set aside a portion. They cannot drink from the cup, but water may still be poured. They cannot answer in daylight, but a name may still be spoken into the dark. The gate remains closed. The bond remains open. The air grows heavier where judgment begins without sunlight. You are not standing in a hall of marble, and no bright scale hangs before a throne. This is not a place arranged for comfort, spectacle, or hope. It feels older, lower, closer to the first fear that entered the human chest when someone stopped breathing and did not wake. Here, beneath the earth, power becomes quiet. The Sumerian dead do not wander through an empty cavern without rule. They enter a kingdom with hierarchy, officers, and dreadful order. The lower world has a queen. It has attendants. It has gatekeepers. It has judges who belong to the deep, and whose decisions are not softened by human pleading. The most famous among these powers are the Anunnaki, a group of great divine beings whose name later gathered many interpretations. In the underworld texts, they can appear as judges, seated in authority, witnessing what has crossed into their realm. They are not kindly guides with lanterns. They are not demons in the modern sense either. They are powers of structure. They make death official. That is almost worse. A monster can be fought in a story. A judge represents a system, and systems are harder to charm. You may bring beauty, status, grief, or excuses, but the lower court recognizes only its own laws. Once a soul descends, the human story becomes subject to underworld procedure. Life has ended. A new classification begins. In Sumerian and later Mesopotamian imagination, the underworld is often ruled by Ereshkigal, the great queen below. Her name carries a weight like cold stone in the hand. She is not a decorative figure placed beside death. She is sovereign over it. She sits where every lineage eventually sends its children, priests, laborers, merchants, and kings. No family outranks her. No city wall excludes her. No crown remains convincing before her. This is one of the striking truths in the ancient material. The underworld powers do not appear as random threats. They form a governing body. Their presence suggests that death is not only loss, but incorporation into a realm with its own authority. The dead are no longer citizens of the upper city. They belong to the administration below. Records from Mesopotamian literature and ritual confirm that divine courts were a recurring way of imagining cosmic order. Scholars at major universities such as Chicago, Oxford, and Yale have studied how ancient Mesopotamian texts often portray gods in assemblies, councils, and ranked offices. This reflects a world where human cities were also governed through hierarchy, decree, labor, and duty. Heaven has meetings. The underworld has them too. One feels a little sympathy for the ancient dead. Imagine dying, descending into darkness, and still finding bureaucracy waiting. It is not exactly the restful afterlife advertised in modern brochures. There is no harp lesson, no cloud seating, no complimentary honey cake. There are judges, gates, rules, and the unmistakable feeling that someone has already stamped the tablet. Yet the image is powerful because it is familiar. The Sumerians lived among institutions. Temples managed fields. Palaces issued commands. Scribes tracked work, grain, livestock, debts, and offerings. Authority was measured, recorded, witnessed, and sealed. It makes sense that death itself would be imagined through similar shapes. The underworld becomes the greatest institution of all, because no appeal escapes it. This court below does not seem primarily concerned with moral judgment as later traditions sometimes define it. The Sumerian evidence does not clearly offer a paradise for good people and torment for wicked people. The dead share a common fate, though their conditions may differ by burial, remembrance, and social ties. The judges below are less like moral examiners and more like guardians of divine order. Their function is boundary, their sentence is containment. Still, the presence of judges changes the emotional landscape. If there are judges, then death has witnesses. If death has witnesses, then the final passage is not merely private. The soul enters a realm where powers see, classify, and hold. That thought can feel strangely dignified. It can also feel suffocating. You can imagine the chamber in dreamlike fragments. The floor is packed earth, cold beneath bare feet. The walls drink the lamplight before it can spread. Figures sit in shadow, vast and motionless, more felt than seen. Their faces are not fully described because the imagination knows when not to look too closely. A name is spoken. A silence answers. Then the dead are placed, not welcomed, placed. The quirky edge of this belief comes through in the way Mesopotamian texts sometimes handle divine order with almost legal precision. Gods debate. Messengers carry instructions. Gatekeepers demand explanations. Underworld law has conditions and consequences. One can almost imagine a clerk of the dead sighing over another incomplete burial case, wondering why the living never fill out anything properly. It is funny only until you remember the grief behind it. A person who lost someone needed to believe the passage had structure. Without structure, death becomes a hole. With structure, it becomes a dark country, frightening but mapped. Judges and rulers make the unknown seem governed. They do not make it gentle, they make it intelligible. That distinction matters. A governed terror is still terror, but it can be spoken about. The Anunnaki, as underworld judges, occupy that strange space between fear and explanation. They do not remove sorrow. They give sorrow a court. They say that death belongs to a larger order, one that may not care about human preference, but is not meaningless. The soul is not simply scattered. It is received by powers whose authority predates the mourner's tears. There is an open scholarly debate about how the Anunnaki should be understood across different periods of Mesopotamian religion. Some researchers treat them as a broad category of great gods, whose role changes by text and era. Others emphasize their underworld function in specific literary traditions. The difficulty is that ancient names travel across centuries, gathering meanings like dust on a buried seal. That debate is important because it protects the texts from being flattened. Ancient religion was not one frozen picture. It shifted through cities, dynasties, scribal schools, and languages. A divine name could appear in one context as cosmic authority, in another as underworld power, and in another as part of a larger theological arrangement. The clay preserves patterns, but also movement. Still, the emotional truth remains steady. The dead face powers greater than the living. This is why souls cannot simply return. They are not unattended. They are held within a realm that has claims, rulers, and witnesses. To come back would not be like stepping outside for air. It would mean breaking custody. It would mean crossing gates guarded by more than wood and bronze. It would mean undoing a judgment already absorbed into the lower order. You feel the weight of that system now. Above, a city might be sleeping under stars. A child might turn beneath a wool covering. A pot might cool near the hearth. A widow might lie awake, listening to the house settle around her, wondering whether a dream was only a dream. Beneath all that ordinary tenderness sits the imagined court below, silent and immovable. No shouting reaches it, no bargain easily changes it. Yet the judges below are not only frightening, they also reveal how seriously the Sumerians took the dead. The dead were not rubbish thrown into oblivion. They entered a realm with rulers. They became subjects of a hidden kingdom. Their condition was poor, their freedom limited, their light gone, but their existence was still acknowledged. That is a severe kind of respect. Perhaps this is what makes the ancient underworld feel so mature. It does not flatter human longing. It does not pretend that love turns death into a doorway with friendly hinges. It gives the dead a place, gives the place a government, and gives the government authority. Then it asks the living to continue their duties under the sky. In the darkness below, the judges remain seated. Their decree does not need volume. Their silence is enough. The scent of water becomes strangely powerful in the dark, not river water glittering beneath the sun, and not rain striking a courtyard after months of heat. This is water imagined as mercy, poured carefully into earth, vanishing through dust toward those who can no longer lift a cup. In the Sumerian world, the dead may be gone from the table, but they are not beyond hunger. That thought is tender. It is also troubling. You are inside a low house of mud brick, where the evening air carries the smell of barley bread, oil smoke, and cooling clay. A small lamp burns near the wall. Its flame wavers whenever someone moves past it. The household is quiet, not because nothing is happening, but because a name is about to be spoken. A vessel is lifted. Water touches the ground. No voice answers from below. Yet the gesture continues with solemn care. It is simple enough for any family to perform, and ancient enough to feel almost older than language. The living cannot open the underworld gate, but they can send something downward. A little water, a little food, a little attention. That is the fragile bridge. In Mesopotamian belief, the condition of the dead could depend upon the care given by surviving relatives. Offerings, libations, burial rites, and spoken remembrance helped maintain the dead in their diminished existence. Major university research into cuneiform ritual texts and burial customs has shown that this was not a decorative idea. It belonged to the structure of household duty. The dead needed descendants. The living needed ancestors settled. This mutual dependence feels very different from later images of a soul judged once and sent away forever. In the Sumerian imagination, death does not completely sever the social bond. It transforms it into ritual obligation. A father may no longer command the house, but his name may still require attention. A mother may no longer grind grain, but she may still be remembered through food and water. The family continues in layers. Some sit above the floor, some lie beneath it. The idea is easy to misunderstand. Offerings were not thought of as cheerful meals served in a bright dining hall below the ground. The underworld remained bleak, dusty, and sealed, yet the dead could suffer more deeply if neglected. To be forgotten was not just emotionally sad. It could become a condition of spiritual poverty, a thinning of the already thin existence below. This makes memory feel practical, not sentimental. A name is almost nourishment. A poured drink is almost speech. A small offering is almost a hand reaching into darkness. The gesture says, "You are not at the table, but you are not erased. You cannot return to us, but we will not let your name fall completely into dust." That is a powerful promise, and a fragile one, for what happens when the last person who knows your name dies? What happens when a house is abandoned, a city is burned. A family line fails, or tablets break into unreadable pieces. The Sumerian world had no easy answer. Perhaps the dead became poorer. Perhaps they grew restless. Perhaps they sank deeper into silence. You feel the ache of that. The fear of being forgotten may be older than written history itself. Long before elaborate theology, humans cared for bodies, marked graves, placed objects with the dead, and returned to burial places. In Sumer, this care entered the written world with unusual clarity. The records do not only show that people died, they show that the living worried about what the dead required. A mainstream historical fact gives the scene weight. Excavations at ancient Mesopotamian sites have revealed graves with vessels, personal items, ornaments, and signs of household connection. Scholars from institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Chicago have studied how burial practice and family identity were woven together. The dead were often placed within a network of social meaning. A bowl in a grave is not just a bowl, it is a question shaped in clay. Will you need this? Will you know us? Will something of you continue below the house? These questions are never fully answered by the objects themselves, but they tremble around them. Archaeology finds the cup. Imagination hears the grief. There is also a strange little tidbit from later Mesopotamian traditions that feels almost like dark household comedy. A dead person without proper offerings might become irritated, hungry, or troublesome, appearing in dreams or disturbances. In the old logic, neglecting the dead could turn family memory into family inconvenience. Even death, apparently, did not prevent certain relatives from making their needs known. A small joke helps the darkness breathe, but only a little, because the fear behind the joke is raw. A neglected ghost is not merely spooky, it is evidence that care has failed. The household has not performed its duty. The boundary between living and dead has become unstable because the relationship has been ignored. Ritual is not superstition alone. It is maintenance of peace between worlds. The dead cannot come home, but their hunger can. That is the unsettling compromise. Souls cannot return as living persons, yet the consequences of their neglect can rise. A dream, an illness, an omen, a strange fear in the room at night, all might be interpreted as signs that something below has not been satisfied. Ancient people did not divide emotional, religious, and physical life as neatly as modern minds often do. They felt connection everywhere. You may hear this in the quiet of the house. A woman sets aside a portion of food. A man speaks the name of his father. A child watches without fully understanding. The lamp hisses softly. Outside, a reed screen taps against the doorway in the wind. Somewhere beneath the floor, the imagined dead remain beyond reach. No one expects them to stand up. That would be disorder. Instead, the household offers continuity. Food and water become symbols of belonging that death cannot completely cancel. The act does not rescue the soul from the underworld. It eases the condition of remaining there. It acknowledges that the dead continue in need, while the living continue in responsibility. There is an open scholarly debate about how widely these practices varied among social classes and across cities. Some researchers emphasize elite burial customs and written rituals preserved by scribes. Others argue that ordinary household practices, though less visible, may have been just as important. The evidence is uneven because wealthy tombs speak louder than poor graves, and tablets preserve some voices better than others. Still, the pattern is clear enough to haunt you. The dead required remembrance. The living feared neglect. The household stood between hunger and peace. You can almost imagine an old man teaching a child the proper words, not in a grand temple, not in front of a crowd, but in the dim corner of a home. He tells the child when to pour water, where to place food, whose names must be spoken, and why forgetting is dangerous. The child listens, perhaps bored, perhaps frightened, perhaps thinking more about bread than ancestors. Then years pass. The child becomes the elder. The names remain, if luck is kind. This is how the Sumerian dead survived among the living, not as returned bodies, not as shining visitors, but as obligations carried in memory. Their existence depended on those who still breathed above them. A soul below the earth was not free, yet it was not entirely abandoned while someone remembered. That is the quiet mercy in a severe belief. The underworld may be a house of dust, but even dust can receive water. The dead may drink only through ritual, yet the living still pour. The gate may remain closed, yet names can travel farther than footsteps. Love cannot reverse the journey, but it can become repetition, duty, habit, and care. The vessel tilts again. Water darkens the earth. For one brief moment, the silence below feels less empty. The room is almost asleep when the ghost begins to move. Not across the floor in a sheet, of course. The ancient dead were never so theatrical, and honestly, they had better things to do than invent bad costumes. This movement is subtler. It arrives through a dream, a chill in the skin, a sound beside the wall, a pressure in the chest just before waking. You are lying in a Mesopotamian house at night. The lamp has burned low. The last thread of smoke curls from its blackened lip. A reed mat scratches beneath your shoulder. Somewhere outside, dogs bark once, then fall silent with suspicious discipline. The air tastes of dust, old clay, and the faint sweetness of stored dates. The city is quiet, but not empty. Nothing feels empty at night. In the Sumerian and broader Mesopotamian imagination, ghosts existed near the edge of ordinary life. They were not usually returned persons in the full human sense. They were remnants, disturbances, presences that appeared when something had gone wrong. A spirit might trouble the living because it lacked burial, offerings, descendants, or proper ritual attention. This is an important distinction. A ghost is not a victory over death. A ghost is evidence of disorder. The dead are meant to remain below, held within the lower country, and tended through memory. When a ghost rises into household space, it does not prove that souls can freely return. It proves the boundary has become strained. Something has slipped through a crack, and the living must respond before the crack widens. You feel that ancient fear in the dark. A dream comes first. A dead brother stands at the threshold, dusty and silent. His lips do not move, yet the dreamer wakes with a demand already understood. Water, food, burial, a name, a wrong that has not been settled. The ghost doesn't need a speech, because grief already supplies the language. Mourning does not erase the fear. Someone remembers a missed offering. Someone asks whether a grave was disturbed. Someone wonders whether the dream was only the mind, which is exactly the sort of modern phrase ancient people would find both arrogant and useless. For them, dreams could be messages, omens, or openings. Sleep was not merely rest. It was a borderland where gods, ghosts, and warnings might step closer. That borderland made night powerful. It also made it dangerous. A mainstream historical fact gives weight to this atmosphere. Mesopotamian libraries and ritual collections preserve texts concerned with ghosts, omens, dreams, and the treatment of restless dead. Scholars at institutions such as Yale, Chicago, and Oxford have studied these materials as part of the wider healing and ritual traditions of ancient Iraq. The evidence shows that ghosts were not casual folklore only. They belonged to recognized systems of diagnosis and remedy. If a person suffered from recurring fear, illness, nightmares, or strange misfortune, a ghost might be named as the cause. Ritual experts could be consulted. Offerings might be made. Words might be spoken. Figurines, water, flour, smoke, or symbolic actions might be used to send the presence back where it belonged. The goal was restoration, not conversation. That matters because modern imagination often wants ghosts to reveal secrets. We want them to tell us where they went, what they saw, whether death hurt, whether forgiveness exists. Ancient Mesopotamian ghost traditions are far less sentimental. The restless dead usually reveal a problem, not a philosophy. Their appearance says, something has failed, and the living must repair it. The ghost is a symptom. The ritual is the treatment. There is a strange practicality in that. The unknown becomes manageable through action. If the dead are thirsty, pour water. If the burial was incomplete, perform rites. If a spirit clings to a house, address it by name and command it away through proper formulas. Fear becomes a procedure, and procedure becomes relief. You can imagine the ritual specialist entering a home. He is not dressed like a stage magician, thankfully. He carries inherited knowledge, spoken lines, and objects whose meanings have settled through generations. The family watches from the dimness. A child hides behind someone's robe. An old woman mutters that she always knew the corner room felt wrong. There is always a corner room. The specialist listens. He asks about dreams, illness, recent deaths, neglected rites, and strange signs. He is part healer, part scholar, part religious technician, part very serious customer service representative for the unseen. The comparison is ridiculous, but not entirely unfair. People called him because the household had a problem it could not solve alone. A quirky tidbit from Mesopotamian ghost lore is that spirits could be associated with very specific social failures. Those who died violently, remained unburied, lacked descendants, or were not properly mourned, might become especially troubling. The ghost was not just scary because it was dead. It was scary because it stood outside order. The unburied dead had no settled address. That idea chills the room. A grave is not only a place for remains. It is a social position. It tells the dead where to be. It tells the living where to remember. Without burial, the spirit has no proper location in the structure of existence. It drifts, and drifting is dangerous in a culture that valued boundaries so deeply. You can feel why the living feared such wandering. A soul without rest may hover near roads, ruins, canals, doorways, or beds. It may enter dreams because dreams are soft places. It may attach itself to a person not out of evil, as modern stories might imagine, but out of hunger, confusion, resentment, or need. The dead are not always monsters. Sometimes they are neglected dependents. That is more unsettling. A monster can be hated. A neglected dead person asks for guilt. In the dim house, the family understands this. Fear and duty mix until they cannot be separated. They want the ghost gone, but they also want the dead settled. They do not wish to destroy the spirit. They wish to restore its distance. The right separation becomes an act of care. There is an open scholarly debate about whether Mesopotamian ghost rituals should be interpreted mainly as religion, medicine, psychology, social repair, or all of these at once. Some researchers emphasize their role in healing unexplained illness. Others focus on family obligation and funerary neglect. Still others see them as part of a wider intellectual system linking omens, gods, bodies, and households. The debate remains alive because the ancient categories are not ours. Their world did not divide cleanly. A nightmare could be emotional, spiritual, medical, and legal in its implications. A dead relative could be memory, presence, danger, and obligation. A ritual could soothe the mind, honor the dead, and restore divine order at the same time. The living did not need one explanation when several could stand together in the dark. This layered thinking made ghosts powerful. They belonged everywhere. They came through the body as illness, through sleep as dream, through the house as disturbance, through ritual as speech, and through memory as guilt. They were proof that death did not erase relationship, even when it forbade return. The ghost was not a soul coming home freely. It was a strained thread pulled too tightly between worlds. And so the living tried to loosen it. A bowl is placed, water is poured. Words are murmured with careful rhythm. The dead are named, addressed, fed, and guided away. The household waits, listening for signs. A dog barks again outside, then stops. The lamp flame steadies. Someone exhales for the first time in what feels like hours. Perhaps the ghost is satisfied. Perhaps the family is. Perhaps those are not always different things. As night deepens, the idea settles softly around you. The Sumerian records do not deny that the dead may approach the living. They deny that such approach is normal, stable, or complete. A ghost at the edge of sleep is not a traveler returning from the underworld with freedom in its hands. It is a disturbance at the locked gate. The soul cannot return as it was, but need can rise, memory can rise, fear can rise, and in the quiet before morning, when the room is dark and the mind is open, even a sealed world may press its face against the door. The king walks where grief has made the road endless. You see him not as a statue, not as a name carved into distant scholarship, but as a man whose hands cannot hold what he has lost. Dust gathers on his skin. His hair is wild. His royal clothing has been replaced by the roughness of travel. He has left behind walls, music, feasting, and command. Power has failed him. That is where Gilgamesh begins to feel real. The ancient epic of Gilgamesh grew from Sumerian stories about a legendary king of Uruk, later woven into Akkadian versions that became one of the great literary works of the ancient world. Tablets recovered from Mesopotamian sites, including fragments from the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, preserve the king's search for life beyond death. Scholars at universities such as Yale, Chicago, and Oxford have studied these texts as a profound early meditation on mortality. But the story is not dry. It is wounded. Gilgamesh is a mighty king, two-thirds divine in later tradition, restless, excessive, and rather exhausting. You can almost imagine the citizens of Uruk quietly wishing their impressive ruler might discover a calming hobby. Then Enkidu enters his life, wild, powerful, and equal to him. Their friendship changes the king. Together they fight monsters, challenge limits, and taste the dangerous sweetness of glory. Then Enkidu dies. The world stops making sense. Gilgamesh looks at the body of his friend and understands something no palace had taught him. Strength does not keep breath in the chest. Fame does not stop the flesh from stilling. Friendship, however deep, cannot argue successfully with the final silence. He mourns, not politely, but violently, with the stunned terror of someone seeing his own end in another person's face. This is the great turning. He does not seek wisdom because he is serene. He seeks it because he is frightened. He goes out into the wild places, crossing lands of heat, darkness, mountains, waters, and strange beings. His journey is not merely geographical. It is the mind traveling through grief, refusing the answer everyone else has accepted. Must I die too? That question drives him. It is a simple question, and completely unreasonable, which is exactly why it remains human. Gilgamesh has seen death take Enkidu, and now the king cannot return to ordinary life. The old pleasures feel thin. The city feels fragile. His own body becomes a future corpse walking upright. Every heartbeat sounds like a countdown. So he searches for Utnapishtim, the survivor of the great flood, a figure granted a form of immortality by the gods. In the story, Utnapishtim lives beyond the ordinary human condition, distant from the world of cities. Gilgamesh wants what he has. He wants the secret that will undo the terror now living in his bones. The path is strange and luminous. He passes through the mountain tunnel of the sun, where darkness stretches for hours beyond comfort. He meets Siduri, the tavern keeper, whose wisdom is practical, almost brutally kind. She tells him, in effect, to eat, drink, wash, dress, cherish the child who holds his hand, and delight in the spouse beside him. It is not immortality. It is ordinary life, which grief finds deeply insulting. Gilgamesh continues, "Of course he does. A grieving person rarely accepts good advice on the first delivery, especially not when the advice is basically, have dinner and stop trying to defeat biology." Yet Siduri's counsel is one of the oldest surviving expressions of human acceptance. She does not mock his grief. She tells him where mortal meaning can still be found. He wants more. He crosses the waters of death, a phrase that carries its own cold gravity. These waters are not just dangerous. They are boundary. They separate ordinary life from the place where the immortal flood survivor dwells. Gilgamesh must use care, poles, and guidance to cross without touching what should not be touched. Even his journey toward immortality requires respecting deadly limits. That is very Mesopotamian. When Gilgamesh reaches Utnapishtim, he receives not a triumphant secret, but a story of exception. The flood survivor tells how the gods brought destruction, how life was preserved, and how he and his wife were granted a unique fate. The lesson is quietly devastating. Immortality is not a technique available to determined kings. It is not a prize for courage. It is a divine exception, once given, not easily repeated. Gilgamesh is tested. He must stay awake. He fails almost immediately. Sleep takes him, soft and humiliating, proving that even before death, the body already knows surrender. Utnapishtim's wife marks the days with loaves of bread, a wonderfully domestic method of exposing heroic failure. Nothing punctures epic grandeur quite like baked goods, keeping receipts. The king wakes and learns the truth. If he cannot defeat sleep, how will he defeat death? This moment connects deeply with Sumerian and Mesopotamian views of the afterlife. The problem is not simply that Gilgamesh lacks information. The problem is that human beings are not built to cross back from death. Mortality is part of their assigned condition. Even a king with divine ancestry finds the road blocked. He may hear stories of exceptions, but he cannot make himself one. The dead cannot return because humans are not owners of the boundary. The gods are. A mainstream historical fact rests beneath the literary beauty. The Epic of Gilgamesh, though surviving most fully in Akkadian, preserves older Sumerian traditions about Gilgamesh, Enkidu, the underworld, and kingship. Academic study of these tablets has shown how Mesopotamian scribes reshaped older stories over centuries, using them to explore grief, fame, friendship, kingship, and the unavoidable end of mortal life. The king's journey becomes the listener's journey. You do not need a crown to understand him. You have known something like his fear, even if quietly. A hospital corridor at night, a phone call that changes the shape of the room, a bed that remains empty, a name you still expect to hear. Mortality does not arrive as an idea first. It arrives as absence. Gilgamesh tries to answer absence with distance. He goes farther and farther away. Yet wisdom brings him back toward the city. There is a plant in the story, a secret thing from the deep, sometimes described as capable of restoring youth. Gilgamesh obtains it after another dangerous effort. For a moment, hope returns. Perhaps not immortality, but renewal. Perhaps not escape, but delay. That would be something. That would be more than most mortals receive. Then a snake steals it. The king is left with empty hands. It is a strange, almost rude ending to his hope. After mountains, darkness, death waters, immortal survivors, divine stories, and sleepless failure, a snake arrives like nature's sarcastic little editor and removes the loophole. Gilgamesh does not become deathless. He returns to Uruk, where the walls he built remain. Stone replaces the impossible dream, not forever, but longer than breath. There is a quirky fringe tidbit often attached to Gilgamesh in modern imagination. Some readers claim the epic hides secret knowledge of lost civilizations, ancient technologies, or forbidden immortality practices. The tablets certainly contain mysteries, flood memories, and symbolic journeys. Yet the deeper power of the poem is not that it gives a hidden method for escaping death. It refuses one. That refusal is the secret. The king who wants to return from the edge learns that return has limits. The dead do not come back because longing is strong. The living do not become immortal because grief is sincere. Even heroic effort must bow before a boundary built into the human condition. There is an open scholarly debate about how to read Gilgamesh's final wisdom. Some researchers emphasize royal ideology and the lasting fame of city building. Others focus on friendship, mortality, ritual, or the poem's relationship to older underworld myths. Still others see the epic as a meditation on how writing itself resists oblivion. The debate continues because the poem holds all these possibilities without becoming small. You stand with Gilgamesh before the walls of Uruk. The bricks glow in late light. The city breathes again around him. People bargain, grind grain, carry jars, scold children, and complain about work, as people have always done with impressive consistency. The king has not defeated death. He has returned with knowledge that tastes like dust and salt. He cannot bring Enkidu back. He cannot keep himself forever, but he can see the wall. He can name the city. He can understand that human beings live in what they build. Remember and hand forward, not because these things conquer death, but because they stand for a while against the dark. Gilgamesh searched for the lost secret and found the oldest answer. The road beyond death does not reopen for desire. The soul cannot return to life by strength, grief, fame, or royal command. And somewhere in the quiet between clay tablet and human heart, the king's failure becomes a kind of truth. The hidden economy of the dead begins with a household at dusk, not with coins, not with markets, not with a merchant weighing silver in a courtyard. Though the ancient world knew all these things well enough, this economy is quieter. It is made of names, portions of food, poured water, burial places, family duty, and the fear that neglect may travel downward like a debt unpaid. You feel it as a pressure in the room. A person dies, and the living do not only grieve, they become responsible. They must prepare the body, choose a resting place, perform the rites, and continue acts of remembrance when the first loud sorrow has faded into routine. That routine matters. It is the point at which love becomes obligation. The Sumerian world understood obligation deeply. Fields needed workers, temples needed offerings, canals needed cleaning, families needed heirs, ancestors needed care. Nothing stayed orderly by itself, which is a slightly unfair truth of civilization and also of laundry. The living world had to be maintained, and the world of the dead, dim as it was, required its own maintenance. This is where the unseen economy appears. A son pours water for a father. A daughter remembers a mother's name. A household places offerings where the dead may receive them through ritual. The act is small, but it carries social weight. The living give, and the dead remain settled. The living remember, and the dead do not drift hungry into the edges of dreams. That exchange is not commerce in the modern sense. It is kinship made durable. In ancient Mesopotamia, family identity did not end with breathing bodies alone. The household extended backward into ancestors and forward into descendants. A person's fate below could be shaped by those still above. To leave children, especially children able and willing to perform funerary duties, was not merely a social preference. It could be imagined as protection against abandonment in death. A grave without memory becomes poor. A name without a speaker fades. A soul without offerings grows thin. This is the hidden economy. The dead depend upon the living, while the living depend upon the dead remaining quiet, honored, and properly located. A neglected ancestor might become a troubling presence. A remembered ancestor might remain part of household order. The exchange is unequal, but not meaningless. The living have food, breath, and voice. The dead have claims, memory, and the ability to unsettle the margins of peace. No one is entirely free. That is very Sumerian. A mainstream historical fact stands beneath this arrangement. Archaeological and textual research from institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania, Yale, and the University of Chicago has shown that Mesopotamian burial practice often connected the dead with household continuity, property, and family identity. Legal and ritual texts reveal a society where inheritance, descent, and proper care shaped both social order and religious imagination. You can see this in the way houses become more than shelters. A house is a storage place for grain, tools, and sleeping mats. It is also a place where family history settles into the floor. Beneath the rooms, near the courtyard, or in remembered burial spaces, the dead may remain linked to the living line. The house holds generations in vertical silence. Above, people eat. Below, people are remembered. The arrangement is intimate, but it is not soft. A household can fail. Children can die. Heirs can quarrel. Property can be lost. A city can fall. Invaders can burn records. Floods can erase graves. The dead, who depend on continuity, are vulnerable to every break in human life. Their afterlife is tied to the fragile success of those who remain. This makes ancestry a serious matter. It is not only pride, it is survival through memory. You may imagine an elder speaking to a young man who has inherited a house. The elder tells him where the family dead rest, what offerings are expected, which names must not be dropped, which vessels belong to the rites. The young man nods with the expression of someone who understands about half and thinks he understands all, a timeless human tradition. Yet the instruction is not casual. It is a transfer of duty. The living heir receives more than walls and jars. He receives relationships with those who no longer speak plainly. He inherits invisible debts. To fail the dead would be to fail the household itself. To remember them is to keep the family line intact across the barrier that cannot be crossed. There is a strange dignity in that. A person's life does not vanish into private memory only. It enters a pattern of obligations. The dead person becomes part of the household's continuing structure, not as a living authority in the ordinary sense, but as a presence requiring ritual care. The living do not own the past. They serve it. This also helps explain why burial mattered so deeply. A body properly placed is a soul properly addressed. The grave provides location, and location allows ritual. Without placement, remembrance becomes unstable. Without rites, the dead may not settle. Without descendants, offerings may cease. The afterlife, in this view, is not a private vacation taken by the soul. It is a social condition maintained by a network, a rather demanding network. Death, apparently, did not cancel family responsibilities. It only made them harder to argue about, since one side had become silent and possibly capable of haunting the room. There is the gentle sarcasm. Yes, but it points toward a real anxiety. The dead could not defend their own remembrance. They depended on the loyalty of the living. The living could also use the dead. That is another layer of the hidden economy. Ancestors could strengthen claims to property, legitimacy, and household continuity. To remember the dead was to place oneself inside a line. To neglect them might weaken more than piety. It could threaten identity, inheritance, and belonging. The dead became silent witnesses to rites in the living world. This is where the underworld reaches into law, not directly, perhaps, but through family structure. A grave beneath a house says that this place holds a lineage. A name recited in ritual says that the living belong to someone. A proper offering says that order continues. The dead are not wandering abstractions. They anchor the household in time. There is an open scholarly debate about how far ancestor veneration shaped everyday Mesopotamian society compared with temple-centered religion. Some researchers emphasize the powerful role of great gods, royal rituals, and state cults. Others argue that household rites for the dead were just as essential for ordinary people, even when they left fewer written traces. The evidence is partial because families did not always write down what they did most habitually. The most common acts often leave the faintest marks. A poured cup evaporates. A spoken name disappears into air. A small meal offered in a dark corner leaves little for archaeologists except suggestive traces and context. Yet the texts that do survive speak clearly enough to let you feel the pattern. The dead required care. The family carried memory. The household became the meeting place between need below and breath above. You can hear it now in the quiet evening. Someone lifts a bowl. Someone says a name with practiced softness. Someone has done this many times and still feels the old sadness. The gesture is not dramatic. It is almost domestic enough to be missed. That may be why it is powerful. The deepest human bonds often survive as repeated small acts. A little water, a little bread, a name in the mouth. The Sumerian records suggest that the dead cannot return because their place in the economy has changed. They no longer produce grain, speak in councils, embrace children, or sit at the meal. Yet they still receive. They still require. They still shape the duties of those who live. Their power is not physical return. It is continuing claim. That claim can be loving. It can also be heavy. Every family knows this in some form. The past asks things of the present. The dead shape choices, rooms, stories, fears, and loyalties. A grandmother's name on the tongue can guide a household more gently than a law. A father's burial place can hold a family to land. A forgotten ancestor can become a blank space that still presses on the mind. The ancient Sumerians gave that pressure ritual form. They did not let the dead dissolve into sentiment. They made remembrance concrete, edible, drinkable, repeatable, and bound to place. In a world where clay cracked and cities fell, repetition became resistance. To remember once was grief. To remember again and again was structure. So the hidden economy continues in silence. The living give what they can. The dead remain where they must. Between them passes a current no eye can see, made from duty, fear, tenderness, and the old human refusal to let a name sink easily into dust. The coldest ideas about death often begin without cruelty. They begin in the attempt to explain why no one answers from the grave. They begin with a body that has been washed, wrapped, mourned, and placed away from ordinary movement. They begin with a family standing under the same sky, feeling that the world has continued in an almost offensive manner. The sun rises, bread still bakes, children still ask unreasonable questions. Somewhere in that ordinary continuation, ancient people built the oldest shapes of the afterlife. In Sumer, those shapes were not bright with mercy. They were dark with structure. The soul did not ascend into a paradise of reward. The dead descended into a realm where everyone, high or low, became diminished and dependent. It is a vision older than many later hopes, older than heaven's mercy. You feel that age in the clay. The Sumerian underworld belongs to a world before many familiar religious comforts had taken the forms later generations would know. It does not separate humanity into neat eternal rewards and punishments. It does not promise that goodness creates sunlight below. It does not declare that love will reopen the gate. Instead, it gives the dead a shared destination beneath the earth, governed by powers that do not need to explain themselves. That restraint feels severe. It also feels honest. A mainstream historical fact helps place this vision in time. Sumerian literary and administrative texts from the 3rd millennium BC stand among the earliest extensive written records of human civilization. Research at major institutions such as Oxford, Yale, and the University of Pennsylvania has shown that these tablets preserve some of the first known written reflections on kingship, divine order, mourning, and the fate of the dead. These records come from early cities, not from isolated dreamers. They belong to people who built canals, stored grain, trained scribes, and organized temple labor. Their afterlife is not detached from society. It reflects a world where rank, duty, boundary, and dependence shaped everything. The dead enter a lower version of that same order, stripped of warmth but not of structure. Later cultures would imagine death differently. Egypt, to the west, developed elaborate visions of judgment, solar rebirth, and a blessed afterlife for those who passed divine tests. In later Israelite traditions, Greek thought, Persian religion, Christian theology, Islamic belief, and many other systems, death could become a threshold toward judgment, transformation, resurrection, paradise, punishment, or union with divine mercy. The ancient world did not speak with one voice. The Sumerian voice is quieter and colder. It does not say the dead are rewarded for virtue with golden fields. It says they are below. It does not say the wicked alone suffer darkness. It says darkness is the general condition. It does not say death can be spiritually negotiated by moral excellence. It says the realm has gates, rulers, and rules. The comparison can be unsettling. Modern listeners often expect the afterlife to carry moral meaning. We want the kind to be comforted, the cruel to be corrected, and the innocent to be held in light. The Sumerian material does not give that to us easily. Its underworld is not built primarily around justice, as later traditions understand it. It is built around inevitability. That is a different kind of truth, a heavier one. There is a strange dignity in this older pattern. Death is not treated as a courtroom designed to satisfy human wishes. It is treated as a condition all must enter, because that is how existence is arranged. The king does not escape because he wore a crown. The worker does not escape because he carried bricks. The singer, the brewer, the shepherd, the child, the priestess, and the soldier all move toward the same lower country. It is democratic in the bleakest possible way. Everyone gets the dust package. No premium version appears in the earliest texts, which feels very unfair from a customer service perspective. Yet the lack of special treatment reveals something profound. In death, the hierarchy of the upper world weakens. It may not vanish completely, since burial and offerings still matter, but it cannot preserve life's brightness. The underworld reduces everyone. That reduction may be the point. You can imagine later generations trying to soften this picture. Who would not want to? A dark, universal underworld leaves the heart unsatisfied. It does not answer grief with reunion. It does not answer injustice with divine repair. It does not answer innocence with rescue. So human traditions continued to think, revise, hope, argue, and dream beyond the Sumerian gloom. But the older image remains beneath them like a foundation stone, a land of no return, a house of dust, a gate with rules, a descent that even gods cannot treat casually. These ideas echo through later Mesopotamian literature and influence the wider ancient Near Eastern imagination. They show a stage in human thought where death is still close to the earth, close to burial, close to the household floor, close to hunger and thirst. The dead are not angels. They are shadows needing care. A quirky fringe tidbit often appears in modern discussions of Sumerian religion. Some writers claim that later afterlife traditions conceal or overwrite a much older Mesopotamian truth about death, as though the tablets preserve a forbidden original doctrine. That claim is too grand for the evidence. Cultures do not simply hide one ancient secret. They inherit, reinterpret, disagree, forget, and reshape. Still, the instinct behind the claim is understandable. The Sumerian vision feels primordial. It feels like a root system under later forests of belief, not because it explains everything, but because it speaks from a time when writing itself was young. Cities were hard won, and death had not yet been dressed in so many consolations. The texts have the roughness of first attempts. They do not comfort politely. They name the dark and leave it dark. This may be why they feel unsettling at bedtime. Not loud unsettling, soft unsettling, the kind that waits beside a slow breath. There is an open scholarly debate about how directly Sumerian and Akkadian afterlife ideas influenced later traditions in the region. Some scholars emphasize shared cultural patterns across the ancient Near East, including descent, dust, shadowy existence, and divine assemblies. Others warn against drawing straight lines, where the evidence shows many local developments and transformations. Ancient ideas traveled, but they changed while traveling. That caution is important. History is not a row of dominoes. It is more like river water passing through canals, marshes, fields, and jars, taking new shapes without ceasing to be water. A phrase may survive while its meaning shifts. A mythic structure may reappear under another name. A fear may remain recognizable even when theology changes around it. The Sumerian underworld is one such old current. It carries the fear of silence. It carries the need for remembrance. It carries the sense that death is not easily reversed because the dead have crossed into another order. Later hopes may rise above it like temples above mud brick foundations, but the foundation remains felt. Before mercy becomes radiant in later imagination, there is the cold fact of separation. Before paradise blooms, there is the house of dust. You stand now between traditions in a quiet mental landscape where many human answers overlap. To one side are later visions of judgment, heaven, resurrection, purification, or rebirth. To the other side is the Sumerian descent, bare and old, where the dead do not return, because return is not part of the design. Neither vision is merely abstract. Each answers pain differently. The Sumerian answer is not sweet, but it has a stern compassion of its own. It tells the living not to pretend. It tells them to bury properly, remember faithfully, pour water, speak names, and accept that love must continue without possession. It does not promise that the dead are happy. It insists that they are not nothing. That distinction is small. It is enormous. For the person kneeling with an offering, perhaps it was enough. Not enough to erase sorrow, because nothing does that neatly. Enough to act, enough to keep a bond, enough to transform helplessness into duty. In a universe where no soul could return at will, the living still had something to do. That may be the hidden mercy inside the older darkness. Not rescue, responsibility. The ancient Sumerian records reveal a world before many later consolations, yet not a world without care. They show death as descent, the afterlife as diminished existence, and memory as a fragile provision sent into the deep. It is cold beside later heavens, but it is not empty. The dust has names in it, and sometimes, in the oldest stories, that is where truth begins. The soul becomes easiest to imagine when breath leaves the mouth, not because anyone can see it clearly, but because the body gives the living a final lesson. One moment, the chest rises and falls. Warmth lingers in the skin. A voice may still be expected, because the room has not yet accepted silence. Then the motion stops, and everyone understands that something has changed. The person is there. The person is gone. This is the mystery ancient people tried to name. In Sumerian thought, what remained after death was not a free, shining personality drifting through golden air. It was something thinner, something shadowed, something bound to the lower realm. Modern scholars often translate the surviving concept as a ghost, spirit, or shade. Though no single English word fits perfectly, that difficulty is important. A translation is a small bridge across a very deep canal. The Sumerians lived in a world where breath, body, name, and social place were closely bound. A person was not merely an isolated mind hidden inside flesh. A person existed through family, city, labor, ritual, speech, and divine order. When death came, those bonds did not vanish all at once, but they changed beyond repair. The body became still. The name required memory. The shade went below. You can feel the simplicity and terror of that pattern. The soul is not imagined as a self-sufficient traveler. It becomes dependent, reduced, and strangely vulnerable. It may continue, but it does not continue with the fullness of life. It no longer eats by hand, drinks by mouth, walks by sunlight, or answers when called in the courtyard. It is presence without ordinary power. A mainstream historical fact gives this idea a firm setting. Cuneiform texts from ancient Mesopotamia distinguish between the corpse, the name of the deceased, and the ghostly remainder that might enter the underworld or trouble the living. Scholars at institutions such as Yale, Chicago, and Oxford have studied these distinctions through ritual texts, literary works, and funerary evidence. The ancient categories are not identical to modern ones. They resist being simplified. You may want to ask, did the Sumerians believe in a soul? The answer is yes, but not exactly in the way later philosophy might frame it. Their surviving texts suggest a continuing identity after death, yet one tied closely to burial, offerings, remembrance, and the underworld's authority. The dead person remains someone, but not someone who can resume ordinary life. That is the sadness. Identity survives, but capacity fades. The old underworld texts often make the dead sound like shadows of humanity. They dwell in darkness. They receive poor sustenance. They depend upon what the living provide. Their existence feels closer to dim endurance than fulfilled being. The Sumerian afterlife is not designed to satisfy the modern hunger for personal growth beyond death. It is an afterlife of residue. A person becomes what remains. Breath is gone, but name may remain. Flesh decays, but memory may remain. The shade descends, but ritual connection may remain. Each remnant is weaker than the living whole, yet together they prevent complete disappearance. The dead are not alive. They are not nothing. They occupy the difficult middle that grief understands too well. Grief also lives in a middle place. It knows someone is gone, It keeps speaking anyway. You are standing now beside a body prepared for burial. The room is dim. The smell of oil, linen, clay, and human sorrow fills the air. Hands move carefully, because tenderness becomes more intense when it can no longer be answered. Someone washes the skin. Someone arranges the body. Someone whispers a name as if the name itself might steady the passage. There is no rush. Death has already arrived. What remains is care. The Sumerians would have understood this care not as symbolic only, but as necessary. Proper treatment of the body helped settle the ghost. Proper mourning helped locate grief. Proper offerings helped sustain the dead. The living could not restore breath, but they could prevent neglect from becoming another form of harm. The soul, then, was not entirely private. It was social even after death. That idea feels strange to many modern minds. People often imagine the soul as an individual essence, complete and portable, like a lantern carried from one room to another. The Sumerian evidence suggests something more entangled. The dead person's fate depended on family, ritual, burial, and recognition. Without these, the shade could become hungry, restless, or poor. Apparently, even the afterlife had social consequences, which is both fascinating and mildly exhausting. You might hope death would at least excuse everyone from household expectations, but ancient Mesopotamia was not so generous. The soul carried the imprint of relationships. The living carried responsibility for that imprint. The underworld received the dead, but the family still shaped the condition of remembrance. This makes the Sumerian soul feel like breath and shadow together. Breath marks the living force that leaves. Shadow marks the dim remainder that persists. Neither image is perfect, but together they approach the ancient intuition. Life is warm, moving, and voiced. Death is cool, reduced, and dependent on memory. The human being does not transform into light. The human being settles into dusk. The dusk is not meaningless. It has rules. There is an open scholarly debate about how precisely to define the Mesopotamian ghostly self. Some researchers emphasize the ghost as a continuing personal entity within the underworld. Others focus on ritual language and argue that the surviving texts reveal more about social practice than metaphysical theory. Still, others suggest that ancient people may have held several overlapping ideas at once. That last possibility feels wise. Human beings often do. A grieving parent can believe the dead child is gone, yet still speak to them. A widow can know the grave is sealed, yet still leave food in a certain place. A family can fear a ghost while also loving the person who became one. Belief does not always stand in straight lines. It gathers like lamplight around pain. The Sumerians did not need a single neat doctrine to act. They had rituals, stories, names, and fears. The soul as shadow appears most clearly in its limitations. It cannot simply climb back into the body. It cannot reclaim the old household role. It cannot undo death by wanting sunlight. If it rises at all, it rises as ghostly disturbance, dream pressure, or ritual concern. That is not return. It is the echo of a broken bond. An echo is real. It is not the voice itself. A quirky fringe tidbit sometimes claims that the Sumerians possessed hidden knowledge of the soul as an energy form, encoded in mythic language and misunderstood by modern scholars. Such ideas drift far beyond the tablets, but they show how deeply people still want ancient records to contain secret certainty. The plain evidence is quieter and more haunting. The Sumerians saw the dead as altered presences, not liberated immortals. That plainness has force. It refuses glamour. The soul does not become powerful through death. It becomes vulnerable. The dead person needs burial, offerings, descendants, memory, and distance. If neglected, the shade may trouble the living, but even then it does not regain full life. It remains proof that something persists after breath, while also proving that persistence is not the same as return. This is the hidden ache of the Sumerian records. They recognize continuity without reversal. The soul continues, but diminished. The name continues, but only if spoken. The family continues, but wounded. The underworld continues, but sealed. Everything survives in a lesser form, like the last glow on a mud brick wall after sunset. You can feel the evening in that image. The wall is still there. The light is leaving. Perhaps this is why the ancient soul seems so close to shadow. A shadow belongs to a body, yet is not the body. It moves with life, yet has no life of its own. At sunset, shadows lengthen until shapes distort and merge with darkness. Death, in Sumerian imagination, may have felt like that final lengthening. The person stretches into absence, then the dark receives them, and still someone above speaks their name. The gate that opens only one way stands inside every human story. You do not need to see it in stone. You do not need to find it buried beneath a temple floor, sealed by bricks and marked by a forgotten sign. Its shape is older than architecture. It appears wherever the living stand near the dead and understand that closeness has become distance. A hand can touch the body. A voice cannot call it back. This is the cruel simplicity that the Sumerian records shape into gates, decrees, judges, and dissent. Death is not imagined as confusion. It is imagined as a crossing into a realm where return is forbidden by the structure of existence. The soul does not fail to return because the road is hard. It fails because the road is not made for return. The passage has direction. Downward, you feel that direction in the ancient landscape. Rivers run through the plain, carrying silt, reeds, fish, and the smell of wet earth. Canals divide fields into lines of labor and survival. Houses rise from mud brick, then slowly lean back toward mud. Bodies are placed beneath floors, in graves, in remembered ground. Everything in this world teaches descent. Water sinks, clay settles, seeds enter soil before they grow. The dead go below, but they do not rise like grain. That difference matters. Grain returns through season, labor, and divine favor. The dead remain in the lower country, dependent on offerings rather than rebirth into ordinary life. The Sumerian imagination knows that nature has cycles, yet human death is not simply folded into those cycles as personal return. The field grows again. The person does not walk back from the grave. This is why the underworld gate is so powerful. It separates resemblance from reality. The living may see renewal all around them. Barley sprouts after burial in soil. Floodwaters recede and leave fertile ground. The moon disappears and returns. The sun enters darkness and rises. Yet a dead person does not reappear at dawn. Smiling awkwardly and asking whether anyone saved dinner, ancient people saw the contradiction. They lived inside it. Nature returns. Humans vanish. The Sumerian stories do not ignore this tension. They give gods exceptional journeys, seasonal figures, partial returns, and ghosts, occasional disturbances. Yet every exception proves the firmness of the ordinary law. When a goddess descends, she is stripped. When she returns, a substitute is required. When a spirit rises, it signals a problem. When a king seeks immortality, he comes home empty-handed. The gate is not decorative. It is the rule. A mainstream historical fact lies beneath this mythic pattern. Mesopotamian literature repeatedly presents the underworld as a realm of restricted movement, governed by gates, divine authority, and ritual conditions. Scholars at major universities such as Chicago, Yale, and Oxford have studied these patterns across Sumerian and Akkadian texts, showing that descent and enclosure were central to ancient conceptions of death. The lower world is not an open road, it is a controlled domain. This control is essential because boundaries were essential to Mesopotamian life. City walls marked protection. Canals marked water's proper path. Fields marked labor and ownership. Temples marked sacred space. Doorways marked the change from street to household. The world became livable by drawing lines, maintaining them, and fearing their failure. Death was the greatest boundary. It needed the strongest gate. You can imagine that gate not as a single object, but as a layered idea. The first gate is the body's stillness. The second is burial. The third is ritual separation. The fourth is the underworld's claim. The fifth is memory, which reaches back but cannot reverse. Each layer closes softly, like cloth laid over a face, until the living understand that the person has crossed beyond ordinary touch. No thunder is required. The closing is quiet. That quiet makes it worse. A loud death may terrify, but a quiet death instructs. It shows that the boundary does not need spectacle. A breath stops, a room changes, people speak more softly, as if sound itself has become improper. The living begin to move around the dead with caution, because the body has become both beloved and strange. The soul has entered another condition. The gate has done its work. A quirky fringe tidbit sometimes appears in modern retellings, suggesting that the Sumerian Gate of No Return was inspired by an actual hidden doorway beneath ancient temples, perhaps connected to underground chambers used for initiation rites. The evidence for such a literal secret passage is thin, but the idea refuses to die, which is rather fitting. People love turning metaphors into real estate. Still, the mythic gate needs no buried corridor. Its power comes from experience. Every culture knows the one-way gate because every household eventually stands before it. The Sumerians gave that experience architecture, law, and divine personnel. They did not invent the pain. They organized it. They made the invisible threshold visible enough to be feared and respected. You feel that organization in the underworld's personnel. Gatekeepers ask questions. Messengers carry commands. Judges sit in shadow. A queen rules below. These figures do not exist merely to decorate stories. They explain why personal desire cannot overturn death. The gate is guarded because the boundary protects cosmic order. If the dead returned freely, every category would break. Ancestor and child would mix. Past and present would collide. Inheritance would collapse into argument. Even grief would become impossible to finish, because every farewell might be temporary in the most confusing way. The Sumerian one-way gate prevents the world from becoming haunted beyond endurance. It is frightening, but it is also merciful in a stern, unfriendly way. It keeps life moving forward, even when the heart wants to walk backward. Perhaps that is one hidden truth here. The gate closes not only over the dead, it closes over the living, forcing them to continue under the sky. A mourner may pour water, speak names, and dream of the lost, but morning still arrives with work attached. Grain must be ground. Animals must be fed. Children must be answered. Someone has to repair the wall, because apparently grief doesn't stop mud brick from cracking. Life insists, not kindly, perhaps, but steadily. The dead cannot return because the living must learn to live with absence. This is not a cheerful lesson. It is not tidy. It does not sparkle. Yet it is woven into the Sumerian records with remarkable seriousness. Return would satisfy longing for a moment, but it would destroy the order that allows households, memory, inheritance, and ritual to continue. The dead remain below. The living remain responsible. Between them, the gate defines the relationship. There is an open scholarly debate about whether the one-way nature of the Mesopotamian underworld reflects a coherent theology or a cluster of overlapping images from myth, ritual, burial practice, and social order. Some researchers emphasize literary motifs of descent and return. Others focus on funerary obligations and household religion. Still others see the gate as a symbolic expression of mortality itself. The debate cannot remove the emotional clarity. The road is one way because death changes status beyond repair. A person does not merely move location. They become a different kind of being, a shade, a name, a dependent presence, a member of the lower realm. To return fully would require not just travel, but reversal of condition. Breath would have to re-enter. Social place would have to be restored. The underworld's claim would have to be broken. The grave would have to become a doorway without consequence. The Sumerians rarely allowed that fantasy. They knew too much about consequence. In their world, every action rippled through divine and social order. Missed offerings could matter. Broken oaths could matter. Neglected rituals could matter. Boundaries mattered because reality itself was fragile. The gate of death was therefore not merely a wall against hope. It was a support beam in the house of existence. Remove it, and the house trembles. So you stand before the imagined threshold as night deepens around the old city. The stars appear above the plain, cold and countless. A lamp glows in a doorway. Somewhere, a family finishes its meal. Somewhere else, water is poured toward the ground. No figure rises from below to take a seat among the living. Still, the bond remains. That is the final tenderness of the gate. It blocks return, but not remembrance. It denies the body's restoration, but not the name's survival. It prevents the dead from walking back into daylight, but it does not forbid the living from reaching downward through ritual, story, and care. The gate opens only one way for footsteps. Memory moves differently. It seeps through cracks. It passes through spoken names. It rides on water poured into dust. It settles in clay tablets, household rites, and the quiet ache that keeps people faithful to those who are gone. The dead cannot return, but the living can continue to answer their absence. The door remains closed. The listening continues. When the clay falls silent, the unanswered questions grow louder, not loudly in the room and not in the mind like thunder. They rise the way cool air rises from old stone after sunset, gently and without permission. You stand among broken tablets, missing lines, damaged names, and stories that survived only because fire, collapse, and burial sometimes preserve what human hands intended to use for a while, then discard. History can be strange like that. A city dies, and its records live. A scribe's lesson tablet, perhaps copied by a tired student with sore fingers and other perfectly ordinary complaints, may outlast kings, temples, walls, and entire languages. The great voices of ancient Sumer come to you through accidents of survival. Clay was pressed, clay was dried, clay was buried, clay was found. Between those acts lies nearly all of recorded human time. You feel small beside that, not in a frightening way, more in the way one feels small beneath a clear night sky, aware that the world is older than any single sorrow. The tablets do not answer everything about death. They do something subtler. They show how one of the earliest literate civilizations gave shape to the dark. Without pretending, the dark had become kind. The dead went below, the living remained above. Memory passed between them like water into dust. That is the pattern left behind, and it is not a simple doctrine neatly arranged for modern readers. It is a scattering of myths, rituals, laments, burial customs, and scholarly reconstructions. Some pieces are firm, some are uncertain, some are missing entirely, which is very inconvenient of the ancient world, though perhaps fair enough after 4,000 years. A mainstream historical fact anchors the silence. Thousands of Sumerian and later Mesopotamian tablets have been recovered from ancient sites, and many remain fragmentary, unpublished, or debated by specialists. Research associated with institutions such as Yale, Oxford, Chicago, and the University of Pennsylvania continues to refine how these texts are read, dated, translated, and understood. The past is not finished. It is still being deciphered. That thought gives the tablets an unusual power. They are not dead objects lying politely in museum cases. They are active mysteries. A broken corner can change a line. A newly joined fragment can alter a myth. A sign once read one way may later be reconsidered. Even the underworld, it seems, must wait for careful editing. There is a gentle irony there. The land of no return keeps sending footnotes, yet the deepest silence remains. No tablet gives the voice of an ordinary dead person describing the lower world with certainty. No soul writes back from the house of dust. No ghost leaves a calm travel account explaining the gates, the judges, the hunger, the darkness, and whether the offerings truly arrive. What you have instead are the living trying to understand the dead. That is always what history gives you, the living speaking around absence. In the Sumerian records, death is not romanticized into escape. It is not transformed into an easy reunion. It is placed beneath the earth, governed by powers, softened only by remembrance, and surrounded by rules that even gods must respect. The soul continues, but altered. The person remains, but reduced. Love persists, but without control. This is why the old texts feel so mature. They refuse to flatter grief. They acknowledge something many cultures have struggled to say. Love may continue after death, but continuation is not the same as return. A name may survive, but a name is not a hand. An offering may be poured, but the cup is not lifted in reply. A dream may bring the dead near, but mourning restores the distance. That distance is the hidden truth, and yet the distance does not make care useless. This is the quiet brilliance of the Sumerian imagination. The gate remains closed, but the living still act. They bury, they feed, they pour, they speak, they remember. They do not defeat the underworld, but they refuse to let it have everything. That refusal is small. It is also immense. A quirky fringe tidbit continues to follow Sumer like a shadow in modern culture. Some claim that the tablets hide secret revelations about otherworldly beings, lost technologies, or forbidden maps of the afterlife. These claims often travel far beyond what the records can carry. Still, their popularity reveals something real. People sense that the oldest texts are not merely old. They feel close to the first human questions. Where did we come from? Why do we die? What waits in the dark? Why can they not come back? The scholarly answer is cautious, as it should be. The Sumerian afterlife was not one fixed textbook belief. It was a living set of images and practices shaped by cities, scribal schools, temples, households, and centuries of change. Some details remain uncertain. Some terms resist translation. Some myths survive in later forms, carrying older material through new languages and political worlds. There is an open scholarly debate about how far these underworld images reflect actual household belief rather than literary tradition. Some researchers emphasize ritual practice and burial evidence. Others emphasize school texts, mythic performance, and theological imagination. The boundary between belief and story is difficult to draw, because ancient people often lived their stories through ritual. Perhaps that is the point. A myth is not only entertainment. A ritual is not only performance. A grave is not only a place. All three meet around the human need to give form to what cannot be mastered. The Sumerians gave death a geography because grief needs somewhere to look. They gave it rulers because terror becomes less shapeless when authority is imagined. They gave it offerings because love needs a gesture when embrace is no longer possible. The clay tablets preserve that gesture in another form. Each line is a kind of offering to memory. Not originally, perhaps. The scribes had their own purposes, their own duties, their own school exercises and temple traditions. Yet to you, much later, the signs become small vessels carrying water across time. They keep names, images, and fears from vanishing completely. You are part of that survival now. By listening, you continue the chain, not because you believe every ancient image exactly as it was written, not because the underworld has become certain, but because attention itself is a form of remembrance. When you imagine the dust, the gates, the judges, the offerings, and the silent dead, the tablets breathe once more in the mind. For a moment, the house of dust is not forgotten. For a moment, the dead have listeners. And perhaps that is all the living have ever been able to give with certainty. Not rescue, not reversal, not the opening of the final gate. Only attention, care, and the fragile kindness of speaking into silence. The last tablet rests in your hand. Its edge is broken. Its signs are shallow. Some lines are clear enough to follow, while others dissolve into damage and scholarly hesitation. You want it to say more. You want the old scribe to finish the thought, to explain the rule, to reveal whether the soul mourns its own exile, or whether darkness becomes familiar with time. But the clay does not continue. It ends where it ends. That is fitting. Somehow, a record about no return also refuses to return everything it once held. The missing lines become part of the teaching. The unanswered space becomes part of the underworld's silence. What survives is powerful, but incomplete. Like memory itself, so you leave the tablets where they are, in the soft light of imagination, among shelves, dust, labels, and the breathless patience of museums. Outside, the modern world moves with cars, screens, voices, and electric brightness. Yet somewhere beneath all that brightness, the old question remains exactly where Sumer left it. What waits beyond death? Why do souls not return? The records answer with gates, dust, offerings, judges, shadows, and silence. Then they stop. They do not close the mystery. They only show how ancient hands once reached toward it, pressing fear and tenderness into clay before the darkness could take every word. And perhaps the story is not yet complete. Now the night softens around you. The old city grows distant, as if its walls are sinking slowly back into the plain from which they were made. The river darkens beneath a sky filled with patient stars. No gate opens in the earth. No voice rises clearly from below. There is only the hush of reeds, the cooling of clay, and the faint imagined sound of water poured for a name. You may let the question rest now. It does not need to be solved before sleep. The Sumerians did not solve it either. They shaped it, carried it, feared it, and cared for it through ritual. They understood that some doors remain closed, yet love may still sit quietly outside them. They knew that memory is not the same as return, but it is not nothing. So let the tablets fade. Let the dust settle. Let the house grow still. Somewhere in the deep past, a lamp burns low beside a wall. A family finishes its evening rites. A scribe sets down his reed stylus and rubs clay from his fingers. Above him, the stars remain bright and remote. Beneath him, the dead remain in their silent country. No one needs to hurry now. The river keeps moving through the darkness, slow and wide, carrying silt toward fields that will turn green again. The city sleeps above its buried names. The earth holds what it has been given, and in that ancient quiet, your own breathing becomes gentle, steady, and enough. Perhaps the dead cannot return. Perhaps the living cannot follow yet. But for this small hour, between waking and sleep, you can simply listen to the stillness they left behind and drift safely beneath the long, dark sky.